Lincoln Goines, Mark Water. They make it easy. All right, let's see. What are we going to do next? Okay, this next one is, that was, of course, Chain Lightning, sort of a sweet little ditty about fascism, actually. Sorry I didn't want to sing it, but the lyrics are pretty great. And timely. Check it out. This next tune is a tune of mine. It's many years ago when I began to sort of travel a little and try to find like a pickup band to play with. I found that most of the tunes that I was playing with my band, sort of leaned heavy on sort of my love for arranging and sort of specific parts and background vocals and all sorts of stuff. So I always felt like I never had anything that I could just sort of quickly call like a simple tune that like it's clear, it's easy, and where it could sound pretty good like just off the bat, So I tried to write a few, just with that in mind, just like okay, no frills, simple, and this was one of them that I came up with. And I sort of modeled it on the groove of the Chicken. You remember, everybody knows the Chicken. That's one of those. But even that tune can be, sort of too much for some people. So this is a blues. This is about as simple as it gets. But of course, these guys are capable of playing anything. So we didn't need this one for them, but it's easy for me. So this is what's it called? Let's see. It's Why Don't You Think About That? Is what it's called. Let's see. Yeah, so we'll do. I'll play after the head. I'll play the head a couple times, solo for a while, and then we'll do a couple choruses for like a couple choruses, fours.
Okay. Cool.
Right. Yeah. And that's the rehearsal. Let's see. So I'll play the pickup, and we'll just be right on the top. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Let's see. We're going to play one more, and this is really one of the only other Steely Dan tunes I thought I could manage to get through with a trio, and that remains to be seen, actually. But it's a fun one, and yeah, it's a challenging one in a way, but it's a fun one. This is Black Friday. So let's see, up front, what is there, 8 bars?
Yes.
Before you enter.
Okay.
So just somewhere. 2, 1, 2, 3. Anyway, thank you. And it's good to be here. I will let you guys hang if you like, or you are free to go if you like to. So you don't need to hang up here. That's all we're going to play as a band. And,
Okay.
But stick around if you like. But again, you guys know these guys, Lincoln and Mark, fantastic. So now we're going to transition to thank you, the yak part of this set. Yeah, well, I'm a reluctant front man.
Sound great, man.
Yeah. So get this going here.
Okay. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Take care. Yeah, you too. Yeah, one more time. Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. That's what you want, guys who, first of all, can play anything, but they do their homework too. That's great. So, when I was invited to do this, I was sort of pondering the sort of question, like, how did I get here? And I don't mean, did I take the train or did I fly? I took the train, but I mean, like, how do I find myself in this position of being invited to Berkeley and to be hosting this this event with this intimidating title of Masterclass. So when I asked myself that question, basically it's a how did I get here kind of question, and it made me do some thinking about my whole musical journey. I'm definitely old enough to be able to look back on it now and see most of it. I doubt that it's going to change all that significantly in the rest of my life. But it certainly changed a lot from the time I began, from the time I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. Thanks, Mark. But in asking myself that question of how did I get here, I came up with sort of 4 realizations, and each of those sort of suggested a question to me, and I guess my hope is that in sort of outlining that stuff, that it might serve sort of as a checklist for anybody who's embarking on a musical journey, and this was sort of the case for me. It may not be the case for everybody, but in some ways it looks to me like it might be sort of a checklist or like an overview of what of a way to sort of just think a little bit about your path, So I don't know. I hope it will be useful, and I'm going to just plow through it here. The first thing I realized was that I had a really deep curiosity about music. The second thing I realized was that I had over the course of time, I had become, I think, a really good listener. The third thing was in all my musical sort of endeavors, I think I was able to identify what I would call sort of my musical self, my musical personality. And the fourth thing was that I developed a lifelong habit of songwriting and improvising, so practicing improvising. So if you take each one of those alone, like they suggest a question, like I said. So my curiosity about music led me to ask, well, how does music work? Now, this is stuff that I'm going to go quickly through because you guys are in an institution which has already told you all of this. But just for consistency's sake, I'm going to go through it. How does music work? Well, it's got rhythm, first thing on my list. Time signatures, notes, rest values. Melody, not always. It's not required. Rhythm's the only thing really required, I guess. But melody, well, shape, phrasing, patterns, scales. Harmony, keys, chord progressions, chords. And then expression, dynamics, rhythmic feel, tone, color, tempo variation, all that stuff. That's sort of the basic stuff of music, and you guys are deep into it, of course, because I presume you all have that same deep curiosity about music too. So I became a good listener, and that leads me to ask the question, well, how do you become a good listener? Well, you listen a lot and closely. That's the important thing. You pay attention. But you also learn to recognize and identify intervals, chords, scales, rhythms, all the stuff. And you study and spend time with the common song forms and structures that whatever your chosen style uses, so that you're familiar with that tradition in the genre. So that third question, how do you find your musical self? Well, I don't think I've ever sort of loved an improviser who didn't have like a mentor or not really a mentor, but someone that they emulated and imitated when they were young. Almost everybody did. But one of my favorite stories about that is apparently Wes Montgomery on his first few gigs went on gigs and played Charlie Christian solos note for note because that's all he knew how to play. I guess he wasn't yet an improviser. And of course, I'm sure he didn't do that for long. But the idea that even like a genius like that could, had to start with a guide, with a mentor, is important and significant. I think you also have to sort of honor your nature, and you find out what will stick, what material that you're studying will stick. I mean, I've found, like, much to my dismay, that sometimes I'm trying to absorb some music that I love on record, and I'm trying to learn how to play it, and I find that no matter what I do, it doesn't seem to come naturally out in my improvising when I'm in the heat of the moment of trying to play on a tune. It's just not available for some reason. It just doesn't stick. Other stuff you find like right away. Okay, yeah, that's so. I think over time you learn what your strengths are, and you can play to them. But I also think it's wise to sort of let yourself be led by what you love, because you're always going to put in more time. You're always going to care more deeply about it. You're going to sound like you've got more conviction in what you're playing if you love the material that you're playing. So that's and that saves time. It's a practical thing, and I think also related to that is to let your sense of fun guide you too. This should be fun. It's a lot of hard work, but it should be in the cause of getting to that place where it can be fun, and it can be easy to forget that if you're working too hard and taking it too seriously. So the last question, the last sort of realization was that I developed a lifelong practice of singing, songwriting, and improvising. That leads me to ask the question, well, how do you become a better composer? How do you become a better improviser? Of course, that's all connected to the listening. This is all sort of related. But to be an improviser, it's pretty essential to know your instrument. I think the only people who can sort of improvise and not sort of be concerned about like the design of the music are some like extremely gifted vocalists, because you can, we all know we can all sing in the shower and like, sing something. We're not necessarily thinking of, oh, I'm singing an A here, I'm singing a B here. We're just sort of singing. So you don't need to know what the names of the notes are. You don't need to know the intervals between the pitches if your intuitive brain is working well. And but if you're going to play an instrument, there's a real shift there. There's something else you have to do a lot of work. It becomes a technical thing and an analytical thing right away. So a little more about that when I'll talk a little more about the whole idea of improvising. But so the other items which are on your list there are know your instrument, know the music, of course, learn to use raw materials creatively, and study improvisers and composers you love. That's a big one, of course. But I think perhaps my most valuable little nugget of advice that I could ever give, and I say this a lot. Some of you have heard me say it to you already, today or yesterday. As a composer, this has served me very well. And I didn't start out doing this. For many years, I never did this. But the idea is to compose what you wish you could improvise, and then repeat that and repeat that and repeat it again and again. And to dig a little deeper on that, I think one of the best examples is to sort of imagine that you've got a track and you're asked to play a guitar solo or any solo over that track. And many of us have had the experience of we'll play a take, and then we'll say, listen back, say, okay, it's cool. But seldom are any of us tempted to walk out and say, oh, that's cool, I'm done. Usually we want to try to get a better one. So we'll do another take and another take, or we'll punch in and say, well, I like the first 4 bars, but maybe punch me in at bar 5. So we'll fix it up. So essentially, what you're doing there is composing what you wish you could have improvised. And although I wish I had done this more. I mean, when I had a chance to sort of record a solo, and I worked on it till I was happy with it, I seldom bothered to sort of learn to really make that a part of my sort of improvising, sort of data bank, but it would have, I think it might have upped my game a little bit, So this is a sort of a technique I've had to use when I've, been sort of appalled at how lame I sounded on a challenging song or something, and maybe it has like a funny, sort of chord progression. Black Friday actually is one of them, where it lures you into this false sense of security with E7 for 16 bars, and then all of a sudden these changes are happening quickly, and one of them goes way out of the key, and a couple of them go out of the key, and like so all my training just didn't really prepare me for being able to sort of successfully negotiate that little sort of tag at the end. And so because I was so unhappy with it, I think if I could have just kept playing that tune live and just try it again every time, and I don't think anything would have changed. I think essentially I would have been just as unhappy with what I played there. But because I decided like this was necessary, I took it home and I basically began to compose a couple of sort of, compose a few solutions, like lines that I thought I wish I could have played that. Why couldn't I think of that on the gig? Well, it was way too hard, and I couldn't. So I would do that, and then I would do another one that's similar. And pretty soon you start, when you do this and you're trying to make it as good as you can, you very quickly start to sort of figure out what the tune requires. You get an idea what the parameters of the song are, and you realize, okay, all this stuff that I've worked on for years, none of that applies. It's not going to work. I'm never going to be able to get that to work on this tune. But this stuff, but this works. And this stuff, okay, this approach will work. And so it turns out that a lot of tunes are quite unique that way. And it occurs to me too that like there are some improvisers who, for their entire careers, would revisit the same songs. They play them a lot. Like Bill Evans is a pianist. I think of him that way. There are a lot of tunes that he would just kind of play a lot. He would always play, and you know, you scratch your head sometimes thinking, well, you know, there's a lot of other tunes out there, but there's something when you get comfy and intimate with a song, and you know, you do a lot of work on it. It's on a different level. I mean, some beautiful stuff can happen spontaneously, but it pays off to do this kind of thing, I think, again and again. So, and I also would recommend too, and I've said this to the few students I've gotten to hang with. You can do a couple of these. Say you have an 8-bar section that you're composing what you wish you could improvise on. You can do that a couple times. The third time you do it might be just sort of, you might try consciously to sort of make it a reordering of all the stuff that's in the first two. So you're purposely sort of kind of trying to sort of on downtime practice the thing that you want to get good at doing, you know, spontaneously. Because, I mean, improvising is this kind of free association of usually chunks of ideas. Almost nobody improvises from one note to the next. We're usually playing chunks of stuff and connecting them in different ways, or changing the rhythms, or changing a few notes here and there. But you can kind of practice that as well by just sort of taking version 1 and like, okay, like let's put this line that's in bar 1 of version 1 and put it in bar 5 or something, or put it on another chord change that's the same type, or change a couple notes in it so that it's the same shape, but it's, you know, it fits the harmony of this other section. You know? So you're basically trying to sort of teach your brain, you know, without being in a heated battle, teach your brain the kinds of things that it's going to need to know when all this is ideally an intuitive venture when you're actually soloing, you know. Because, I mean, if you're looking at a tune for the first time and you don't know what chord changes are, it sort of helps, and you're required to use your analytical brain, or you're not going to know where it's going. But it seems to me like, and I'm sure, I think probably all of you know this that ideally you know the song well enough so that you can trust your intellectual, I mean your intuitive brain, and you don't have to rely on the intellect or the analytical mind. You know, it turns out that the intuitive mind is faster and more efficient but you need to do I've needed to do the homework of sort of the analytical work to understand what, you know, to teach my ear, you know, where to go. But once it's internalized, the beautiful thing is to sort of forget all that, and that's a beautiful thing when you sort of feel sort of like the tune pulls you through, and you're just following the logic of, you know, your ear or something. So those are those 4 points, and that's just like I said, if it can help to sort of, you know, just sort of have you assess, you know, your sort of progress in each of these areas. I mean, those seem like they were significant sort of truths for me, if you will. So the only other thing I wanted to say was a little bit more about the improvising thing. I sort of have a love-hate relationship with improvising because I'm fussy, and to improvise, I think you have to sort of have a lot of acceptance, because there are going to be times when, you know, it's not going to be as good as what you could compose, perhaps, you know. But you wait for those times when it's just magically better than what you could sit down and compose, because that happens all the time, and that's something to do with, I think, the interaction of the people and the truth of the moment or something, which is that's a great thing. So I could never give it up, but I'm fussy enough to be bothered by it sometimes. But in any case, I'm reminded of my good buddy Jim Beard, who passed just over a year ago. He was teaching at an institution not unlike Berkeley, not on this caliber, I'm afraid. But he was assigned to teach a jazz improvisation class, and I think they gave him a class full of people at various levels, including lots of beginners that maybe weren't quite ready for it. But I asked him, because he would frequently complain to me about about the quality of the class, and I asked him. I said, "Well, have you ever given them the happy birthday test?" And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, just next time you go to the improv class, tell them you're going to give them 2 beats, and you want them all to pick up their instruments and play Happy Birthday in the key of F. So, like 1, 2, da, da, da. And of course, he tried it, and it was cacophony because like everybody can sing Happy Birthday. So step 1 of being able to improvise, is to be able to sort of have a melody in your mind. It seems to me that the best improvise is going to happen when you're playing head first, not hands first. Where it's the musical mind that's got the idea. So if we throw invention aside for a second and just to get a read on what's really involved here, everybody knows how to sing Happy Birthday. At least once a year you've sung it, or heard it. Everybody knows it. So. And everybody can sing it, Anybody with a little, who doesn't have a tin ear can sing it in tune pretty much. And although you start to wonder sometimes at ball games when you hear people, they never make the octave, that one leap, So you're starting like, okay, the whole room full of players, they all know how to sing Happy Birthday, but key of F, what does that mean? Okay, so apparently some of them, a number of them, were not yet savvy enough to understand really the concept of key and the concept of scale degree. But right away, if you have to play this on your instrument and you're not just singing it, unless you have perfect pitch, you're going to need to have a note. Somebody's going to have to give you a note to sing it. But you don't have to say, oh, well, the second note is a major second higher than first. You don't have to do that as a singer. We just sing it. That's already in our intuitive brain is working. We don't have to be analytical about that. On the other hand, if you're playing an instrument, you have to do that. So, I don't know, it just is interesting to me to sort of break down, like to get a little clarity on, like, how difficult this is, how much work has to be done. So first of all, before you can get in the game as an improviser on an instrument at all, you got to know your some basic music stuff. Key concept is one right away. You'd have to know that. You'd have to know scale degree. What's a scale degree? Like, okay, well, this doesn't start on F. That's not what it means to be in the key of F. It starts on C. So you have to know this. And a lot of people are trying to improvise before they've done the sort of necessary work that way. It seems to me. So it's just sort of a wake up call for to do your homework and do your analytical work that way, because it's necessary. And then the other thing, after that, you also once you know that it's a C, that okay, key of F means the first note's a C. Once you know that, in order to play it on an instrument, you can't just sort of. You could guess. I've seen a lot of guitar players hunt and peck. I do this to students, and they're. Like the wrong note, right note, and they'll correct it soon enough. But if you're really improvising, you don't have time to do that. You've missed the train, and the train has left the station. So that means, okay, now I have to do ear training. I have to know, I have to be able to hear that and identify the interval from the C to the next note, which is a D. Right? You got to know that, and. Then the further step is that you have to know your instrument. You got to know that if you're a guitar player and you're playing with your third finger on fret number 5, you're playing the C there. You got to know that a major second is on fret 3 of the B string. But if you happen to start with your third finger on the the 8th, is that the 8th fret? The C is on the 8th fret. Then you're going to have to stretch for that D, because that's on the. Am I right? No, was I wrong? Was it? It should have been. 10th, sorry, yeah, 10th to 7th, right? Is that right? Yeah. So, but it's an extra fret. So, I mean, this is stuff you kind of have to know, and you can kind of learn it over time intuitively. But when you don't actually do the sort of brain work and sort of force your mind to learn that fingerboard, you're going to be hunting and pecking, and that just is. That's the wrong way, and that's a time waster, and you never get you can't get in the improvising game really that way. So that's a surprising. That's kind of a lot. There's a lot going on there. So anyway, this might be stuff you all know, so forgive me if that's the case. But so it sometimes feels useful to sort of just get a read on just for clarity's sake. And it can, I think, for some people, can help you do remedial work if you need to. So, like me, I could remember like the C is on fret 10, is that right? 8 fret. Oh well, on the E string, it's Okay. I was thinking on the D string, so that's 10, right? So. Yeah, and then I just have a list which you can check out as you wish about the skills. So the skills are required are a trained ear. It helps to learn to recognize scale degrees in keys as well as the interval relationship between the sounding chord and the note. And that's a kind of interesting thing. I think that's why we like Western music with harmony, because I guess the best example, the broadest example of it is probably the Jobim tune. One note samba, right? Just the one note that gets harmonized so many ways. It's just one scale degree. It's the fifth of the key in the A section, right? But it's changing character all the time, and so its relationship to the sounding chord. So there's two things going on, and that complicates matters. But I think that's what we love about it. But I think it's wise to sort of like practice your ability to identify what scale degree in the overriding key you're on, as well as learning to hear what the scale degree, what the note and the interval relationship to the sounding chord is. That they're both sort of useful and necessary skills, I think, for an improviser. And of course, learning to recognize chord types, that's a good thing, so that you can quickly respond in a spontaneous situation. And you can look at the rest of this stuff. The last thing is my favorite. The last little recommendation is good taste, and it says apply regularly. So that's that's important too. So I'm just going to let that be enough, and ask you to please hit me up with questions, and maybe we could turn the light on a little, so because it's a little intimidating with with the spot in my eye. And I'd like to be able to see you too. No, I can't see them. That's what I mean. Maybe get a little more room light and a little less of that spot. Yeah, that's okay. I can deal with the spot as long as I can see people. Yeah. Yeah. Question here.
So I'm a drummer and I'm a huge Keith Carlock fan.
Oh yeah.
And I just wanted to ask, like, is there anything that he does that you think like really is the best kind of skill for the job from your perspective as a guitarist, or like any stylistic choices he makes that really kind of supports the band in a efficient way?
Well, he's so great for the band because he's got a deep skill set. He's great at a lot of things. Which is so it's hard to even think of any one particular thing. I mean, first of all, he's a total pro. He's a nice guy. He's a ridiculous drummer. He's technically he's so capable. He seems to be able to, like, there's nothing that throws him. You never see him stumble or like try to figure something out. He can do anything, it seems. It's pretty remarkable. But you know that as a drummer. But he's a responsible sort of driver of the bus, if you know what I mean, because he's operating the click, he's got the tempos, and he uses the click to count tunes off. He doesn't keep it on, but that's a big job, and you can crash and burn, and it's happened, not with Keith, but it has happened. I remember another time it happened. The wrong tune gets counted off, or the wrong tempo gets loaded into the metronome, and it's like I remember one time starting. It was Kid Charlemagne or something, and it was the tempo was completely wrong. So it was way too slow, and but we all played the right song. So the intro was something like boom jack 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 jack, and so it started out like boom jack 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 boom jack, and we finally got up to the tempo, but it took us 4 bars to get there because it was so wrong. It was horrible. But it was just. The wrong song was loaded in or something, So I don't know, maybe blame the drum tech. That's what you do in situations like that. But somebody did, But no, Keith's skills are just tremendous in so many ways. I mean, because he can play everything. He not only he knows what's on all the records and he can play that, but he also kind of finds a way to sort of add some of his sort of signature thing to the mix too, But he's a pro, and that's the biggest thing about it. The time is rock solid. He's listening. He's a great listener. And he's a surprisingly good guitar player, and he can play like ZZ Top, like you wouldn't believe, and bass too. He kind of slaps and like he's pretty deep. he's special. Yeah, Will.
Specific things that you notice, because obviously there's being prepared, there's knowing the music, there's being on time, but even just in the personal interactions or handling certain situations, is there something that separates people who are really on it and pros versus the people who maybe need more work on that?
I don't know. I gotta say that the musical like the level of musicianship in the band is pretty seriously high, all across the board. But these are all individual people, and when you're spending time on the bus or on the road, you get to know their personality quirks, and everybody's human, and nobody's perfect. So we're lucky. We've had leaders who have sort of been sensitive to the personalities, so that they've made adjustments to personnel over the years, which include the consideration of okay, how are they to have on the road? Are we? Is it fun to hang? Is it a drag? Does this feel like bad blood somehow? Do we need to make a change? And many changes were made until we got a sort of core group that kind of didn't change, until it sort of had to. So for many, many years, but there's no question they were thinking that way too. So, but a lot of that's just sort of the luck of the mix of personalities, because different bands will be different that way. They'll have different there are different cultures in different bands, and I think it probably helps to have, like-minded people together. They're probably the ones that work best together. But by no means is it's definitely can't be true that the hang with the Steely Dan crew is like some other band. I'm sure it's different. And unique. So yeah, I think the important stuff, I guess, is the music, and that's the public sort of stuff. But of course, there's all sorts of high drama that can happen, and behind the scenes, But it's a pretty great bunch, and there's a lot of love among us. So it's I feel very lucky, So, anybody else? Yeah.
Yes, on the Steely Dan, these iconic solos, how much do you feel like you have to stick with what the people have listened to 1,000,000
Yeah, that's a good.
And what you can add or change.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I get it a lot. And forgive me if some of you've heard me answer this already, but it was funny when I first joined the band. I was hoping for direction, like a lot of clear direction from them about how they wanted me to approach it, because that's a question. That's a legitimate question. Like, do you want me to play like solos like the record? You know, do you want me to avoid playing anything like the record? I mean, or somewhere in between, you know. And whenever I asked them, either Donald or Walter, for any kind of instruction that way, they basically snickered and just laughed, you know. Like, they were just not going to go there, you know, which was struck me as a little funny, because if I were a band leader, I think I'd probably have very strong feelings about what my band members what I'd like them to play. I mean, I don't know. So it struck me as a little odd, you know. But basically, they were saying you're going to sort of, you know, live or die by your own choices. You know, you're not going to. We're not going to help you here. It was a little bit of a wise guy attitude in a way, but that's what they always had, and they never told anybody what to play. But I noticed that, you know, in the '90s they had been on 3 tours, and each tour had a different guitar player, all very great guitar players. But for whatever reason, they kept trying new ones the next tour. And so I figured that's what would happen with me. My first tour was in the year 2000, and I figured I'd get one tour and be on my way like everybody else. But when I started thinking about it, okay, they didn't tell me, they're not going to tell me what to play no matter what I do. So I'm going to have to decide what to play. I can either guess what I think they would like, which seems that would be a nightmare, I think, or I can just trust my own instincts, try to do it the way I think is going to sound the best. And then at least if they fire me after a year, I will have done my best, and I will have given them my honest attempt at like giving them what I thought the music needed, you know. And so it's 25 years later, and that's sort of, so I guess it was okay. I mean, I guess, but it's funny when I think about it, I'm absolutely positive that I make much more conservative choices than they would require or probably even want. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's because I'm a fan of the music, and they're not. That's the funny thing. They're not. Donald can't stand to listen to like early records of his. If somebody puts it on in when we're trying to remember the chord changes to an early song, he has to walk off stage and get out of there. He can't stand to listen. He can't stand those records. That's crazy. I mean, that's just crazy. Those are great records. But he because he's such a jazz fan, he sort of got swayed by like the later records are they have a more obvious nod to maybe jazz harmony. They have more horn arranging and stuff. So they are jazziers. I mean, Wayne Shorter's on one of those tracks, on Asia, So, and he likes those records. He sort of, I think, felt that they arrived finally at a place where he was saying, yeah, this was the kind of work I meant to do, But with the early records, he hadn't liked it as much, and I think that's crazy, But if it were your work, you might sort of wince at some of the stuff you did, like 20 years ago too. It's not. They're not fans. Why would they be fans? I mean, we're seldom fans of our own music. Everybody looks at you a little funny if you are. So. But I'm a fan of that music. And I'm just a hired guy. So when I kind of put myself in the position of an audience member, and I can't imagine somebody like starting reeling in the years with another choice, like, oh, I'm going to improvise something else, count it off, like what? It's the melody, and some of the things which I'm sure some guitar parts which were improvised on the session, but it's pop music and we've heard it so many thousands of times and so many people know it. It's such a part of the culture that it sounds like part of the composition. And really, when you think about like record making in the pop world, I mean, it seems kind of artificial to make distinctions between the composing, the arranging, the recording, the choice of session player, the choice of the take that the session player played, all those things are sort of, part of the big sort of picture of the creative process, and they yield a particular result. And you know, I lost my train of thought, but you get the idea. It's hard to separate those things, and after you hear something that many times, you know, it's hard to. I mean, it feels like it was part of the composition, even though it wasn't originally. You know, so and this is funny. The one time that Donald sort of threatened to give me instruction, you know, about some guitar part was very funny. I've told this. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but it's funny. We hadn't played Hey 19 for months, and he wanted to put it in the show. So we were running it at soundcheck, and I just forgot the little guitar line, which I had always quoted, you know, because that's like one of those examples. It sounds like part of the composition to me, even though I'm sure Hugh McCracken just improvised it, and they kept that take because they liked it. But it still feels like essential. So I always played it. Never thought about not playing it. And but it had been months since we played it, and I kind of fucked it up, and I didn't get it quite right. It was close, and you know, but I didn't get it right. So at the end of the sound check, Donald comes kind of walking over. He's kind of hobbling over reluctantly, you know, and he says, oh, you know, John, like, you know, the beginning of Hey 19. And I started to nod, saying, like, yeah, I'm going to check it out there. But before I could get a word out, he goes, forget it. You know, he turns around and walked away. And he's just so reluctant to sort of to crack the whip or something. It was wild, you know. But I tried to reassure him. I said, no, I'm going to listen to the record. I'll have it together by the showtime, you know. So don't worry. But that's but it's, you know, it's a funny gig because when you have to, you know, when you know that the audience knows those guitar solos sort of better than they probably know the lyrics of the songs, it's a little weird. And it's intimidating because you have to make that choice. Now, and Donald and Walter were clear about one thing. They did not want to be like the Eagles and try to reproduce the records note for note or something like that. That was not their sensibility at all. They're jazz fans. They love improvising. They were always fussy. They were always fussy about musicianship. Like they wanted good time, good. They wanted instruments in tune. They wanted good tone. You know, all the musical values were consistent and high standards for those. But they did not expect it to be like a cover band or a tribute band playing the records note for note. They wanted to be alive and fresh and different every night. And there's lots of horn solos that weren't on the records, lots of chances for people to play. But the guitar role is a little funny because there aren't horn solos on the records, not many of them. Very occasionally are there horn solos. So the horn players have no precedent that they have to even consider. You know, they just blow and play. And but the guitar solos, there are lots of guitar solos on that record, on those records, and so you kind of have to consider them because they're sort of a force in the audience's memory, and so you kind of ignore them at your own peril, I think. But I have found that like some I need to sort of honor more than others, you know. Well, with Kid Charlemagne, I think there might be sort of a few passages where I quote it verbatim, you know, but not much. Mostly there, it seems like I think that one can be sort of improvised, but in that case, I usually find a sound that feels right, you know, so that I'm not offending the overall sense of like what the job that guitar solo did in the big picture. That's important to me, you know, but not the notes. The notes aren't that important. And I'm sort of an unusual. I'm unusual in the fact that I never loved that guitar solo. I mean, I thought it was like weirdly notey and just a little funny. I mean, I learned it and just for kicks once in a while I would play it to see if my band members noticed. None of them ever did. Nobody ever said anything because it's kind of hard to play. It's pretty virtuosic in a way, and it's kind of I do sort of like it now, but I always was scratching my head like, you know, when I first heard it. It's not one of my favorites. Third World Man is probably my favorite, maybe my favorite all-time pop guitar solo, and I think it was composed. So shows you where my head's at. but that's a beauty, you know, and so it's just so singable, you know. That's what I love. But yeah, so it's a funny gig that way, and that's why I love to get on a gig where people don't know the guitar solos, and then I feel free, you know, because that feels a little like a heavy burden after a while, and it makes me sort of long to be just a rhythm guitar player with Steely Dan, not play the solos, you know. And when Adam Rogers joined the band, I tried to give a lot of solos away to him, and Donald started complaining. He wanted me to take some of them back, which was very flattering, but my hand hurts, you know, when I think about it. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, back here.
How were, just in general, how were like Donald and Walter as like bosses, I guess, or on the road or in the studio?
Well, they changed over time quite radically for me in terms of my relationship with them, and I think pretty much everybody in the band. When I first met Donald and Walter, it was on a session that they called me to play on the Two Against Nature record, and Walter was like a diplomat. You know, he was making all the phone calls. He was doing all the business. He was welcoming. He was, you know, forthright, clear, and, you know, personable. Donald was just like avoiding eye contact, like hunching over, and like if you passed him in the hall, he'd like look the other way, and like he was just like weirdly just asocial or something, and very strange. And over the course of the 25 years or so, they did a radical shift, and Walter was withdrawn and unavailable and weird, and I think he might have been ill. And Donald just became just like a funny man and a kind of just, you know, he began to trust the people around him and way more, and just have fun. One of my favorite memories of Donald, you don't think of him as a funny man, but he's kind of a clown. He's a really funny guy. We were recording. It's the first year I was working with him, and when we were recording what became like a PBS special or something like that, and it was a big video shoot, a couple nights, and we were rehearsing, and we were on a break in the dressing room, and the dressing room had windows that looked across the street at a playground where some kids were playing at lunch. It was lunchtime or something. They were playing, and all of a sudden Donald comes in, you know, and he walks over to the window and he cups his hands and he says, "Don't do it! Don't do it!" And we're all looking at him like, what does he have? His mind. He's, "Don't grow up!" He says like that. So he would do stuff like that just randomly, and he's quite a character when you get to know him. But he's really public shy. He just you don't. He just doesn't want to sort of meet people. He doesn't want to. He'd never do a meet and greet, you know. And forget it. He's not a self promoter. And I think he's kind of a reluctant front man. He would rather be a band member, you know. And he always, I think he was a reluctant lead singer. They had a singer in the band in the early days, you know. He didn't want to do it, but they rightly realized that his was a necessary voice for that material. You know, so it's so perfect, you know. But yeah, what was your question again? Remind me. What were they like as bosses? Well, yeah, it was interesting. Walter could be very generous, but he could also be sort of a little. He liked to be king, and he was sort of like, he's the guy that wanted the private plane. Once he died, Donald was on a bus. You know, Donald didn't need to do that. But Walter liked being king, liked being the boss, and he liked that power position, I think. Donald is a little more uncomfortable in that position, I think. And it was interesting to sort of get to know the two of them. I think Walter was absolutely necessary for Donald to have succeeded. Walter had sort of kind of chops with people that Donald just never had. I think if Donald had been a solo artist all his life, we would never have heard of him. You know, Walter was his enabler, I think, in the best possible way, you know, and there really is a character when you look at the solo records and you check out the character of the lyrics mostly. There really is a difference, and you start to sort of realize with the Steely Dan material who brought what to the table, and how they did this, and it's pretty amazing. I love the Nightfly record, but it's sort of sweeter than any Steely Dan record could ever be, and a lot of Donald's stuff is like that. It could be much more romantic, and Walter always brought the edge to it, and the two of them were just totally unusual together. I mean, almost everybody who was at all sensitive would just shut up when the two of them would start kind of going at it, because they would do this kind of friendly one-upmanship, and they shared such a wide sort of base of pop culture knowledge. They were both huge movie buffs. They knew every movie. They were huge jazz fans. Knew serious listeners of jazz, and so when they would get going, it was really fun to watch, and you could easily imagine like the fun they must have had songwriting together. Really an amazing songwriting team. I think really some of America's best. I'm more amazed the more I listen again and again, and I have reason to listen again and again, of course. But quite amazing. Somebody else had a question over here. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to delve on it too much because we just talked about it so much with soloing, but and we were talking a little bit about it yesterday.
Yes.
Kind of the intrinsic kind of value of some parts of solos are intrinsic to the song or
Right.
motifs, right? But I'm curious on how you kind of delegate that, or rather maybe some solos, like, do you learn like every solo note for note? Like, I imagine you don't, but
No, I don't.
for example, like, okay, like what sparked this question was when we were talking about Black Friday and
Right.
improvising over that. Whoever played on it originally, like
I
Dan
don't- I
Diaz or
don't
Skunk Baxter or
I
whoever.
don't remember who did that actually.
Like with a solo like that, like okay, like Reelin' in the Years is more like, or Kid Charlemagne, those are more, popular solos that people will know, or you'll play note for note.
Right.
But like Black Friday, would you learn that solo just to maybe, or any solo like this, just to maybe get in the headspace of who was playing it and see what they were thinking?
Probably not, but I think you're right in that I would probably be trying to sort of, I'm sure I'd be doing sort of a gauging of like how important the song was in terms of the large popular context, because some of them just were not hits. They're not as in the zeitgeist as others. So that, I think that matters, like how much people, I guess that people might be disappointed if they didn't, if you didn't refer to it some way or something, or if it didn't feel right. I mean, mostly I think what I'm looking for is to not offend the big picture sense of like what I love about the music, And so I think I try to be pretty free within that overall sort of viewpoint, where like some songs, it just doesn't seem to matter. I think I mentioned maybe last night even, the Pretzel Logic is a song that for whatever reason, I don't really remember what the sound of the solo on or who played it, and I have no idea what the notes were. I never learned it. It didn't seem necessary to sort of go there with that song. It seemed like it wouldn't suffer by just my playing it the way I felt like playing it. So that's one that. But that definitely wasn't true with Reelin' in the Years, and definitely wasn't true with Kid Charlemagne. Those I considered more carefully, I think, because that seemed more critical.
Since you mentioned Third World Man was like your favorite, when you guys play that live, do you like playing it note for note? Or do
Oh,
you
yeah.
like playing your own?
I do. I mean, I also, I have felt sometimes torn. We don't play it much, but I have felt torn about that one because I think it would really be fun to play on it and to improvise on it. I think it would be an amazing thing to improvise because it feels so great. The chords are so beautiful. It's a really great design. But I could never let go of my love for the original. And I feel that I mean, again, I'm making the conservative choice because I'm a fan, and not everybody's liked me, and there's nothing special or I don't think my point of view about this is the right one or a better one than somebody who just would never think to play what's on the record, but just sort of play what they felt like. I'm not saying that this is a better way to be, but it is reflective of my nature. It's just what I like. So. And because that's what my instructions were, none at all. So I get to do what I like. So the way I exercise my freedom was not by just trying to sort of put my signature on this. I like putting my signature on it if there's room for it. But I don't like doing that at the expense of what I think is more important, and that's the big picture. So again, I'm thinking more like, how am I going to find some way to sort of express myself, but not offend the larger sense of the music that I have, because I have heard guitar players and actually other players too, other soloists, who for me offend the sense of the music, and that I don't like it. So, but that's just me. Like I said, it's not more valuable than anybody else's approach or point of view. But it's just what I like to do, and I've been lucky enough to be able to be called back again and again to get to do what I like. So it's fantastic. So you get what I mean, I think. Yeah.
You sort of touched on this earlier about being a professional and fitting in with what group you're playing. And I mean, you play with some awesome people, Steely Dan, Dukes of September, kind of groups that could pick, any guitarist they'd like to play with them. They'd probably say yes. That being said, what do you think sets you apart and makes you attractive to somebody hiring you like that, as compared to, a bunch of other great guitarists that could take your place?
Yeah. Well. Let's see. I definitely, I'm under no illusion that there aren't, hundreds of other great guitar players that could do that job and do it beautifully. And frankly, I'd love to hear some of them do it. But it's funny. Like, I think I said this to somebody the other day. In looking back on my sort of career opportunities, I can remember a couple of times when the sort of the band that I was sort of involved with, either playing with or auditioning, there was something off about the timing. Well, the first example was like the first road gig I ever had was in 1978 or something with Jack McDuff, and it lasted about 2 months, and it was impossible. The conditions were absolutely horrific and impossible. And it was funny. I was kind of, at the time, I was trying to play jazz, and I was okay. But I was really more interested in more of a kind of chamber jazz or like academic jazz. Not really the blues, the hardcore blues thing. More like Jim Hall and not George Benson, that kind of thing. So, and what Jack really needed was George Benson, like a bluesier approach that would match the music better. And the sort of strange irony of that was this was a great opportunity. It's a great guitar chair. But the timing was completely wrong for me. I mean, 10 years later, I would have played the shit out of that gig, because I would have known how to do it. But 10 years later, there's no way I would even consider doing a gig with Jack, because the conditions were horrible. He would pay us $60 only on the nights we worked. He left us on Route 495 outside of Indianapolis in a hotel, one of those like crummy hotels where all you could get were cheese crackers out of the vending machine. He went up to Chicago with the only car, and he said, "I'm going to go get us some gigs. I'll let you guys know when I get them." We didn't last long, and we all just sort of found our way back to New York. It was horrible. I mean, it's just like, so forget it. I would never have considered that. So the timing was off for that, but it would have been musically it would have been fantastic, but I wasn't really ready for it, And then another time when I was not ready for it, I'm not sure I ever would have been ready for it, probably not, but I had an audition with Mike Brecker, and I did the best I could, and I actually did the best I could, but I wasn't chosen. It probably wasn't good enough. I mean, there was a better choice, whoever it was. Maybe it was Adam. I'm not sure. Probably Adam, but I felt like a fish out of water. I just did not feel like, no, I'm not the right guy for this. I mean, I couldn't say no to the audition, and it was fun to even just be there and play with him. But I didn't really feel like that just wasn't really right for me either. So now that was maybe not a timing thing, just sort of, but stars not aligning, right? But when Steely Dan called, this was much later. It was 1999. I'd been in New York a long time, and I was more mature. I was more confident. I knew a little bit more about what I liked. I had done a record of my own already, and so when they called, I just felt like, well, there's 100 guys they could have called, but like, I'm one of them, and it felt like I was legitimately one of them. And so, and that was, I knew that was true by the way it felt, because I was comfortable. And so the timing was just right for that. And this is a funny thing, but that often happens, and for me it happened. So I just got lucky that one time, and it really did it took maybe 4 or 5 years to sort of get to that point, but it really was a game changer for me. I became a touring musician for the first time. I had really never done that. And I was not young anymore by then. Already, this was 2000, yeah.
How did they contact you the first?
I got a phone call because I was recommended by a keyboard player who was a friend of mine who had been working on those sessions, a guy named Ted Baker, who was also called to play with the Road Band in the year 2000. So he had a copy of the record that I first had done for a Japanese label, and he brought the record to the CD to the session, to one of the sessions, and Donald Walter listened to the first track, and they sort of made some wisecracks about how derivative of Weather Report it was or something, because it was, that was intentional. And Peter Erskine was on it, and Victor Bailey was on it. It was intentionally that way. I wanted to sort of try to do something like Weather Report, but with the guitar in the center, And so they made some wisecrack about it, and naturally, because they're good at that. But they called me, so and the rest is history, as they say. So, yeah, Kim.
Yeah, I loved your question, and I wanted to build on it. You had a great thing we were talking about yesterday about learning to love what you're good at.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that would be great if you didn't mind talking.
Oh, sure. No, I don't mind. Yeah, I think it that came out of this sort of realization, I think, that I had that, and this is, I've had a couple students, who have gone on to sort of careers in the music business, and I remember one asking me, like, what to expect when he got out of school and was in the real world, and I told him that he probably was going to get a job, and chances are he was going to either like that job very much, and then get better at it and get another job that was like that first one, or he's going to not like that job at all and like run in the other direction with a lot of motivation to do something else, to find another more suitable job. And I said, there's no formula. You don't just finish this course and do this next. And there's no. A life is different, but because you're always bringing your creative responses to whatever life throws at you, you end up, sort of making the best of everything. I mean, you're always making progress, whether it's a bad gig or a good gig. It's going to motivate you to either do more of the same or run like hell in the other direction. So it's so that's kind of connected to this idea that. The world will help define you too. If like you may have sort of desires to sort of to be a particular kind of musician or something, but when you're out in the work world and you need to make the money, you're going to get called for what you can do well usually, and what you're good at. Sometimes what you'd like to be doing might not be what you're good at, and I don't know. For me, like, I mean, I spent a lot of man hours and a lot of money on making records of my own, because I sort of I wanted to do it. It felt important to me, and it was sort of my attempt to sort of see if I could get a solo career as a solo artist going. But I was doing it in the cracks of all my touring work, which was pretty significant by that time. I was working a lot. So even by a measure of like what I sort of had to make my priority, it was clear that I was kind of saying yes to the way the world was defining me. It was the world was defining me as a guitar player for hire. And it was not saying a big yes to me as a solo artist, but I also wasn't giving it the time. I mean, I wasn't full-time solo artist, and some people do that. And perhaps if I had if I'd had that kind of nature from the time I was young, and that was the only thing I could do and couldn't do anything else, wasn't interested in anything else, perhaps that would have been a different life, but that wouldn't have been me. So in my case, I happen to love working in lots of different styles for lots of different people. And I'm okay. I'm comfortable with the idea that the world has defined me mostly as a guitar player for hire. And not only, but mostly that. Because I enjoy it, and I realize I am good at it. There's something about what I can bring, which enough people have seemed to want, so that I've been able to keep working since for 25 years or so on the road. So, but yeah, that leads to the idea that like it would be really useful to sort of, first of all, to really know what you're good at, and to learn to enjoy doing what you're good at. If you can get those things in line, it's pretty smooth sailing. It's a pretty beautiful life, it seems to me. And it's great if you can get paid for it too. it's kind of important too. But I think is that generally what we were getting at? Yeah.
I think so. I think because everyone's doing so many things, and it doesn't mean, of course, that you're not going to work on the things that cause you discomfort because you want to get better.
No,
That's
right.
separate. But you also want to pay attention to what people are doing.
No, it's a tricky balance you got to strike. Absolutely. And I mean, thank goodness I had the energy and was willing to put a little money down to make records of my own. I mean, I didn't have a label that was throwing money at me, that was nobody was crying out for the next Jon Herington solo record. But I am so glad that I spent that time and that energy. I mean, it's still work I'm proud of. It's work that a lot of people I know who have heard it love pretty deeply, and that's a very gratifying thing. So I'm not sorry that I did that, but I'm also at a place where I'm not angry about it, and it doesn't bother me. I figured like I've done the best I can. I do the best work I can, and I think it was important to me to follow through and make it available to the world. If you want to hear those records, you can. They're on all the streaming services. I've done that job, but I'm not naturally a self-promoter. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in music, not that other part of it, and that's probably not a good formula for success these days. You got to be good at the other thing too, or find some help. But you probably can find help. Yeah. So you don't need to limit yourself to I mean, just because the world doesn't say yes doesn't mean you can't do something. I think you got to be careful about that. If I had sort of yielded to what maybe is the world's view of me too early, I wouldn't have that work to show, and I would that would be like a poorer world for me. My world would be poorer without that. So, apply all this stuff with good taste, like I said before, and carefully. Not extremely. Find the middle way. Anybody else? Yeah.
So it never bothered you after putting your solo music out that it didn't catch on?
Well, I can say I would say it really doesn't bother me. I mean, I'm not sure if it ever did bother me. I mean, I think there probably was some disappointment, and certainly there was hope. I mean, there was a time when I was
really working hard to sort of do like as many gigs as possible when I was home. You know, I think one year we got as many as like maybe 40 gigs a year, which was a lot considering how much I was away. And when I look at my calendar from those years, it's busy. You know, I was working hard. So it was clear I wanted it to build into something. And I was doing radio interviews. I hired an assistant who sort of set all this stuff up and would try to sell tickets. But, you know, after doing it for several years and 4 records worth of, you know, original music, the crowds weren't getting any bigger. I was still carrying the equipment myself. I get done with the show at the end of the night. And I'd go sign CDs, you know, and I'd be just longing to go to the bar and have a beer, and I would do that. And then I'd look back up at the stage, and all my stuff is still there on the stage. All the amp's still on, the guitar is still up there. The other guys are long gone. They're like, and I've got to like pack up, you know. I've got to drive home. I've got to unload and hope I don't get a ticket while the car's on. You know, I mean, all that stuff. It just started to feel like too much, you know. If it had built a little more, I would have hired a guitar tech. I would have hired a driver, you know, all that stuff. It just never went there, you know. We would, and the music on that year when we were playing 40 gigs a year, there's still some stuff on, you know, YouTube you can find occasionally of the trio I was working with. And some of it, we were getting to a better place. I mean, I was feeling pretty comfortable. Like, one of the ideas was I wanted to sort of see if I could get as comfortable playing my own music as I was on a Steely Dan gig, for instance, you know, because I never had, because I hadn't done enough gigs. And it was just a question of immersion in it, you know, and I just didn't have the time. So I kept booking those gigs just to see if I could get to that place. And it got closer. Never got, like, you know, really consistently easy and fun, that beautiful place where you get, like, if you've been on the road with a band for a month or two, and it's like, that's an amazing thing, you know. But I was wearing more hats too, so that's why it was harder. I was singing, I was fronting the band, I was, like I said, I was driving, carrying the equipment, you know, signing the CDs, you know, all that stuff. You know, it was a lot more than in Steely Dan. You got a lot of help, you know, and I have a very focused, you know, one job to do, you know, so it's a lot simpler, you know. But no, I mean. Disappointed, yeah, but it was disappointment I felt like I've long since gotten over, you know. So, but I still have great pride in the work. I love that those records are still there, and you know, I know some people have enjoyed them. I hope more people do, but I'm not deeply invested in that because that's not my business. I did my part, and that feels good, you know. And again, making it available was important to me. I would not have wanted to do those recordings and then put them on a shelf somewhere and never let anybody hear them. But I'm not going to go overboard like with the self-promotion thing. I just can't do it.
What's the title of the one that they said sounds like what we
Oh, the original one, it was called The Complete Rhyming Dictionary, but that was a very short issue. I actually reissued it later as with the title Pulse and Cadence. And it's an all instrumental music. It's all original music. It was co-produced by my buddy Jim Beard, and great band on it. Ralph Bowen plays some saxophone on it. Victor Bailey and Peter Erskine are the rhythm section. It's hard to beat. It's pretty great, and yeah, it's some fun tunes on it. I still like it, and it came out really well. You know, it's the only record I ever got a budget for that anybody gave me, and it was pretty good at the time. You know,
Sounds like you spent it on the band.
Yeah, the studio and the band. Yeah, definitely a little bit on the band. They weren't cruel to me. They were kind. Peter probably got the most. I don't know. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for listening. It's been fun to be here. The guitar department is pretty cool. Seems like a great vibe, and it's been a pleasure to visit. So, until next time.